Hi, so I'm Julia Woodman, and I'm an Alexander teacher and trainer based in Edinburgh in the UK. And one of the areas that I'm interested in is helping people living with chronic pain. So I'm really excited today to be talking with two people who've done a lot of work in this area. And they are Murray Hodges, based in the States, and Tim Cacciatore in the UK. They've recently just completed a CPD training they've been doing for Alexander teachers. And they've also written a really nice article talking about the current model of pain and how then that relates to the Alexander technique and what we're teaching. So Murray, would you like to say a little bit more about yourself?
I trained as an Alexander Technique teacher in Buenos Aires, Argentina. I started learning Alexander Technique because of chronic back and neck pain. And I was always interested in the science around Alexander Technique. So I actually took a course with Tim, and that's how we met. And after completing my teacher training, I did a therapeutic pain specialist training as well. And then I've just completed my master's at the University of Sydney in the pain management program.
And I also I got into the technique because of my own back pain as well. But I was already a graduate student at the time in motor control, and so I had this direction to understand human coordination. And so my goal after reading some of the literature and realizing that there wasn't a lot known about what these wonderful things that were happening in lessons that were helping my back, and it became sort of my goal early on to try to fill that gap, both to help understand the technique, but also to fill the gap in general, in a basic science way for science, because there was clearly something that was missing. And so I did not, even though pain has been a very important part of my own life and journey, it wasn't my specialty. And so when Mari started getting interested in pain, it was after she took our course, but she got in touch a couple times, and I knew she was doing a program, a certificate program, and then later her master's. And so we started talking about it, and it was really interesting, and it was really relevant. And it was nice, here was someone was going through at the time, a very top-notch pain program, and had a lot of the literature right at her fingertips, and I had studied pain 20 or 30 years ago and kind of had a little introduction that was rusty, but it's clear there was so much more out there, and it was a great opportunity for me to sort of get up to speed with Mari.
And so maybe a good place to start then is for people who haven't yet done your pain cause training or not read your article yet, would it be possible to give like an overview of the kind of the current model of pain? Because there's been like this huge revolution in the last sort of couple of decades, but from this kind of really basic, biomedical model, which still kind of pervades a lot of our culture today, to this kind of new understanding of how complex and fascinating it is.
Yes, there's been revolutionary changes in the way that pain is conceptualized. And that's led to understanding of pain as being this experience of the whole person rather than something that happens in a body part. And there's this realization that pain doesn't happen in a vacuum, that our thoughts, our feelings, our experiences, our environment, our past experiences are all important, and that tissue damage or injury isn't the whole story behind pain, that there's always more to the story than that. And also the evidence that the amount of tissue damage doesn't correlate with the severity of pain. So there's this revolution in pain science that's happened in the last decades that hasn't necessarily reached clinics. It hasn't reached the general public yet. So I feel like it's really important to get that information out to people, because I found it helpful myself in my own journey with pain, And I see that it's helpful for other people as well. And that's what the evidence shows too, is getting this information helps.
And how do you see then the Alexander technique fitting into that new model?
Well, I think that there's this realization that we need to involve the whole person. We need to involve the brain. We need to involve movement and experience. And the more I learn about pain, the more relevant I find the Alexander technique, because it incorporates all these things. It involves, what are you paying attention to? How are you being in your whole body? What do you believe? What do you think about pain and your body? And these are all things that the Alexander technique addresses.
And more broadly, newer mainstream interventions have been moving much closer to things like the technique. It's not like they capture it, but knowing what's known about pain science now, things are heading in the direction of the Alexander technique. It makes much more sense now. I mean, just a quick story. When I was starting out, I wrote a grant, to try to get some funding for coordination and pain. And again, this was 30 years ago. And it just got slammed by the reviewers, that there is no relationship between motor control and coordination and pain. Pain is a, biomechanical issue. And that's all been turned on its head. And so the kinds of things that are known to be helpful are the kinds of things, it's the arena that we're in. That there are missing pieces in that arena. It's not that they have it fully understood for sure. And I think that the technique has some key pieces that still fill in some of the gaps. And I think we have a lot to contribute still. But in a way, things are moving our way, and I think we can use that to our advantage. It's a positive. It's a positive thing. Yeah.
What are the things that we can bring from the Alexander technique to offer to to the current offering for people living with pain from the more conventional approaches?
One of the things that is known is that there's lots of disruptions, sensory motor disruptions, and so disruptions to perception and sensation, and disruptions to coordination and posture. All over the place. It's a widespread sensory motor disruptions, and it's not known what to do about them, or even in the mainstream literature it's not known what to do about them, or even if they should be addressed. Maybe they're just byproducts, and evidence is starting to trickle in that maybe they're important to address. But when mainstream interventions go after a deficit, it's like they focus on it and hit it with a hammer, right? And it's not this kind of holistic approach based on 100 some odd years of observing this phenomenon and knowing how to work with it. And we have some of that knowledge, I think, about how to address these things that they're beginning to uncover, and I think we have some sense that they probably are relevant.
And also the fact that pain, in essence, restricts, it narrows your world. And Alexander technique does the opposite. It helps you to expand your field of attention and your world. So I think that's one way that Alexander technique is really relevant.
Yeah, I mean, it would certainly give people very practical tools through, changing the way we're thinking. And I guess for me, that does seem distinctive, if not unique. Yeah.
Right. And one other difference that Alexander technique has from other approaches, I think, is just this way of being more fully embodied. And also the self-efficacy that comes with learning the technique. Self-efficacy is something that comes up a lot in the literature, and it's something that Alexander technique has some evidence for.
Yeah.
And before, I didn't really understand the relevance or the importance of that. But more and more, I'm seeing how that's a really key piece of why Alexander technique is so helpful, I think, because it's giving people control back over their lives and of their reactions and their way of dealing with the pain, dealing with stimuli related to pain. So I think that's huge.
Yeah, and we really saw that in the Atlas, the neck pain trial that I was involved with. And I think what's really nice is we've got the kind of like the quantitative data to show that, but there's also the qualitative data from the in-depth interviews, which I think tell a really compelling story. And then, of course, there's lots of other studies where you've got that, the qualitative data showing this really kind of just a total kind of revolution in the way people are feeling about themselves and their own confidence to manage their pain.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, just having the capacity to have more choice in the way of being and the way of doing things, I think is really important.
So, so if we come back to the paper that you've published, which it's on the AT Science website, but we'll put a link to it to accompany this post. But if we come back to that, you cover a really diverse, comprehensive range of areas in that. What was your approach to, firstly, to just getting all of that kind of information together, and then also how then you're drawing the parallels that you did and the kind of synergies with the Alexander techniques? I wondered what your approach was to that.
I think we're lucky in that we had slightly different strengths that were really helpful, and so Mari's strength is the pain literature and that's biopsychosocial perspective in particular, and mine is the more motor side. So I think one of the first things we had to do was Mari in a way had already taken our course and was up on my perspective, but I had to do a lot of reading in the pain literature to sort of get up to speed on the pain literature. But really, we had to meet a lot. I mean, we met over the course of a year, weekly and talking a lot. And, there's a huge amount of background that went into, well, I guess first just trying to understand what are the issues, what are the what are the potential mechanisms by which the technique is reducing pain, and what AT teachers need to know about pain. We hashed that out over a long period of time. Yeah.
And the subject of pain is really broad. So I think the hardest thing for us was to limit what we wanted to include in both the article and the course to make it digestible and accessible to people. So that was the hardest thing. For me, the way of structuring all of this has to do with my own journey with pain and recovery and with the Alexander technique and my studies. And I actually went back and looked at my second year presentation when I was doing my teacher training was on pain and its implications for Alexander technique teachers. And I did this 30-page research page of paper that actually my director told me to stop writing. That was funny. More than enough. So I started studying pain right along with my Alexander technique studies. And then as I progressed through other studies, I always had in the back of my mind, how would I share this information with Alexander teachers? And what would be the best way to structure it to communicate this information? So as I was going along, I was always playing with the idea of how would I organize this information in a digestible and interesting way. But so then with the course, the issue for us was, how to put all of this stuff into something coherent for people. And so we chose what we think is most important for people to know, to understand, to have insight, have a better understanding of the person in front of them. But then we also provided resources so people can go down rabbit holes and research more in depth in areas that they're more interested in. Because I think that's one way of really getting into this material is to just go down a rabbit hole of something that you're really interested in.
Okay.
And I think it took us a while too. When we were meeting, it really wasn't, I don't know, we were still playing with how to organize stuff, pretty near the start of the first course. And we ultimately we organize it into sort of eight subtopics, which in retrospect, I think it's working pretty well. The first time we tried to cram it into 6 weeks, which was it was a mistake. It was too much, and
Too short.
it's almost too much for 8 weeks, but not really. I think people are fine with it. But as Mari says, it's such a diverse topic, and so there's so much to cover. Ranging from what is pain, what is the pain experience, to the physiology of pain. How are the signals that are relevant for pain? Nociceptive signals conducted into the nervous system, to sort of psychological and psychosocial factors. We now know that plasticity is a huge part of persistent pain. The nervous system changes, right? And so that's important, as is other types of learning. And of course, then there's the posture piece and the sensory motor disruptions. And we thought it was wise too, to just kind of give an overview of what some mainstream state of the art interventions would be like, just so people
Mm.
kind of knew. And so there's a module that Mari does on that. And then finally we end with a module on the Alexander technique and pain. And so what studies have been done, and then speculating about mechanisms. And there's some evidence, not a lot, but there's a lot of parallels. And so it's
Yeah.
fairly easy to draw some hypotheses about what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating and eye-opening for Alexander teachers to see some of these other approaches that are being used and that have evidence, and what the mechanisms are that have been shown to be at work with those. Because as Tim said, there are parallels, and there may be a lot that is part of those approaches that we're already doing in Alexander technique, and a lot of the approaches seem to me to be a piece of the Alexander technique. That the Alexander technique is really encompassing a lot of those things.
Yeah, because I've been following the Explain Pain group's work for the last, 15 years or so. And, the first conference I went to, I was just kind of like, wow, that's what we do already, or, oh yeah, that is so easily translatable into an Alexander lesson. So I mentioned that as part of your course, you talked about what modern mainstream approaches are. What are the things perhaps then that either different approaches could bring that really aren't in our remit? I'm not talking medical here, just other ones. And conversely, what are the things you think that we might bring that these other approaches are not? And Tim kind of alluded to that a little bit already.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the things, for example, that are doing something similar to what we're doing, for example, cognitive behavioral therapy is looking at reframing beliefs, for example. Well, we do that too. In cognitive behavioral therapy, there may be reframing beliefs about pain. We might be reframing beliefs about where does your arm begin? No, but that could also be easily translatable to what are our beliefs about our nervous system? What are our beliefs about our pain and how it changes? And another approach, acceptance and commitment therapy, is encouraging people to be present with what is. Very similar to what we're doing, and from there making choices. And mindfulness has that same goal of being present with what is.
Yeah, one of the things that's very much a part of our work is that we're monitoring tension across the body, and sort of the person's overall organization of tone, and that's kind of not, it's not the whole picture. It's not, technique is not all about that, but it's integrated into it, right? And when there's a shift in, say, some Alexander state, a cognitive shift, a change in attention or whatever, the tension changes as well. So that tension piece, I think, is key, and it's part of the piece that is missing in mainstream interventions, right? They know that the stuff behind tension or tone is very important and gets really disrupted, but they don't necessarily know how to work with
To
it.
do about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some other interesting approaches being used, like, for example, virtual reality.
Mm-hmm.
And that's working with people's perceptions. And it's really interesting to see how that affects even the sense of effort. And something like that also might hint at some of the things that we're working with in Alexander technique too, as perceptions are changing. Then also motor imagery is an approach that's being used for pain, and well, that's sort of relatable to what we're doing too. And a lot of these just seem to be pieces of what Alexander technique integrates into a whole person approach.
So when you were running your course with Alexander teachers, were you finding that they were all saying, "Oh yeah, yes, we're doing that," or was it a lot of it like really new for them? I don't really mean about the kind of the theory as such, but in terms of, were they going away with really practical things that they could start to use in their teaching?
That's the feedback that we got. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know for myself too, is every time I learn about, the more I learn about these other approaches, it's just really interesting to say, oh, the Alexander technique does that. Alexander technique does that.
But I think one of the things that people go away with is an appreciation for how complex and multifaceted and facile, is that the right word? But I mean, but pain it's a very elusive, tricky, complex thing, and I've certainly run into some people who have kind of minimized it, like, okay, we'll just deal with your use and whatnot. But understanding the pain experience, and how rich, or lack of a better word, how deep that can be, I think is helpful for teachers.
Yeah. And I suppose I've got a particular interest here because I run a training course, and I'm really keen that the trainees have got at least some basic understanding of pain, but kind of looking back in time to the more kind of traditional approaches to teacher training. I think it is what you just said, Tim, that it's more just like, well, we'll just deal with use, and we don't go there with all these other complicated things. So I wondered how you see how your work might actually kind of feed in to future curricula on training courses for Alexander teachers.
Yeah, we would love it to become integrated as part of standard curriculum, because it's I understand, I very much understand the mainstream perspective about, okay, well, we're not about pain, we're about use, and that's really what we do, right? But at the same time, many clients come to the technique with pain, right? And it's integrated, and shouldn't we understand where they're at and how best to work with them, and I think that's important. And those things aren't contradictory,
No.
I think there's this kind of false dichotomy that's often set up. And I don't think that's true at all, actually.
I don't think I can see why it used to be thought that, we don't do pain. But now that the understanding of pain has completely changed. So how can you separate it from use? Because it's such a complex thing that involves every aspect of being a human being, attitudes, beliefs, and all the things you've been talking about. So that is what we deal with. And that all affects our use. And so our use will affect our pain and how we deal with pain, etc., etc.
And there's a growing population of people in pain in the world.
Yeah.
It's one of the most common reasons people come to Alexander technique too. And I think for that reason alone, it's important that we have an understanding of it. And working with pain can be very delicate. And as practitioners, we can have a profound influence on people, either negatively or positively. And the more we understand pain, I think the more we can harness the benefits of Alexander technique for the client and influence them in a positive way, not only by taking advantage of the mechanisms that are helpful in Alexander technique, but also with sharing knowledge and educating, helping to reframe beliefs. I think those kind of things are important too. And understanding how working with a person with persistent pain is different. And of course, everyone is different, but people who have persistent pain have physiological changes that are going on, and having some insight into those can be helpful. And just even recognizing the challenges that a person with persistent pain has, I think is really important.
And when to refer out, when
yes, that's an important point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.